Good morning, everybody. Okay, am I off mute? Yes, I am. We are towards the bottom of 24b, the Mishnah, about 10 lines up. And today we're going to spend a lot of time on hermeneutic principles and a deep dive into some of the details of Tumantara. So hold on to your hats. Okay, so we had already discussed that an ox that causes damage on the private property of the damagee, um, and and that is subject to the machlokas in the Mishnah. So first of all, what is it? Um, so the Mishnah details nagaf, nashach, ravatz bad, if it gores or pushes or bites or sits on or kicks something and causes damage. If it is in public property, he only pays half. And presumably that's because the everybody has some rights to private property, and he doesn't know that this ox is going to be a damaging ox at first. But Rav Tarfon Omer Nesek Shalim. So Rav Tarfon Omer Nesek Shalim v'Chachamim Chatzin Nesek. Rav Tarfon says he pays full damages in the property if it's in the property of the damagee, and the other rabbis say no, he only pays half. Only Rav Tarfon. Tarfon says. Now, unusually, the Mishnah will discuss the back and forth, which we usually leave to the Gemara. So Rav Tarfon says, why do I say Nesek Shalim, full damages? Okay, think about other damages, categories of damages. Shane, which is something that the ox eats, or regel, where he kicks something. So you're not liable at all in Rishus Harabim because that's a normal course of being for the ox, right? He's not intentionally trying to damage something, so the owner is not liable. So, but that's only in public property. But if it happens in private property, then you're really required to take all necessary precautions and you pay full damages. Malcolm Shehechmer ala Karen Rishus Harabim. So Kal v'chomer, where in the case of Karen, which is what we're discussing our Mishnah, damages caused by Karen, where even in Rishus Harabim, you're not off the hook; you have to pay half, right? So it's stricter. It's more. It's a more there's more responsibility on the owner, and so just as we require more care and therefore more damages from the owner in with regards to regel or shane in private property over that of public property, so too we should require something stronger in the case of Karen, if it's in private property, and therefore I say, rather than pay only chatzin nezek, half damages, which is the case of public property, you should pay more in private property. That's why I say, says Rabbi Tarfon, he pays full damages. Amrlo, so they respond. We've discussed this already a little bit. If you're doing the kol b'chomer, you can't say, just as A is more than B, therefore C should be more than D. It's like C should only be as much as A. Like don't make the resulting logical conclusion to be a stronger thing than the original derivation. So and detailing that ma Rishus Harabim Chasin Nazik. So in the case of Rishus Harabim, for Shane and Regel, you see that it's half damages. So then, so therefore, you can conclude that Karen in private property should also be half damages. So Tarfon replies, Afani lo adon Karen mi Karen. So you think that my kal v'chomer is from Karen? It's not from Karen. Ani adon Karen mi Regel. I'm going to I'm going to do my kol vachomer from regel, right? And how's the kol vachomer go? Mav makom shakal shekel al shem yal regel mishus rabim, just as shein regel in public property. There's where the Torah lets you off the hook altogether. Hechmi b'keren, and it says that you, with regards to Karen, you you have to pay more. Makom shechmer al Hashem v'al regel b'shus nizak. So when you look at the private property case, so shein and regel, where you have to pay full damages, din shenachmer Karen. So too, you pay full damages with Karen. Okay, so that's a better kol vachomer. Armalo, so they said. Din lias kanidon, same objection. Just as in the public domain for Karen, you'd pay the same thing. What we learned from that kol vachomer, say the rabbis, is you pay the same thing in private property as you do for public property. So since we know you pay for Karen in public property, you pay half damages. Same too would be, that's all you can derive the about the private property, that you pay the same as you would have paid in public property. True, from Shane and Regel, you're talking about full damages, but in the case of Karen, you're talking about half damages. Okay, so Gemara takes this further. Rabbi Tarfon Leisle Dio. So what? Are we going to say that Rabbi Tarfon doesn't have this principle of Dio Lios Labawi and Adin Lios Kanidon, that you can't overstretch the conclusion of your kol vachomer? Well, Dio Daraisahu. But that's a Torah rule. How do I know it's a Torah rule? Tanya, Rabbi Brisa. Midin kol vachomer ketza. This is referring to hermeneutic principles, how you derive things from the language of the Torah, which is the Gemara's main project sometimes. What is a kol vachomer? How does a kol vachomer work? And here is the source of kol vachomer reasoning. When Miriam is exiled from the camp because she spoke ill of Moshe, so God says to Moshe, if she had spit in her father's face, metaphorically, or whatever, if she had spit in her father's face, then she would at least be liable to a 7-day banishment. So kal vachomer l'shlina arba'asar yom. So she has metaphorically spit in the face of God by undermining confidence in God's representative Moshe. So she should get a 14-day banishment, because God is disrespecting God is worse than disrespecting your father, so should be worse. So it should be 14 days, and yet she was only banished for how many? For 7 days, right? So in other words, we are limiting the kol vachomer. So if she had disrespected her father, she'd be out 7 days. So she's out 7 days is what actually is the decree, right? So that demonstrates the principle of dio, right? That sure, you could say the Shechina, disrespecting the Shechina, is worse, and yet we can't stretch the conclusion of the kol vachomer. We can only go up to the limit of what the kol vachomer definitely proves. In other words, 7 days for your father, therefore 7 days for God. Okay. So that's a proof. So it seems like, how could Rabbi Elazar disagree? It seems pretty obvious that this is a case of dio, right? And the Torah builds this in to, in the Gemara's understanding, to the rules of the kol vachomer. So how can you not agree with the principle of dio? So Gemara's answer is ki leisle dio heichad demifrach kol vachomer. Okay, there are, in a case where the application of dio b'avin adin lios kanidon would undermine the kol vachomer itself. In other words, then the kol vachomer wouldn't be teaching you anything at all. Then you don't apply. Then you don't apply the principle of dio. You only apply dio where the kol vachomer would still be proving something, would still be useful for something. So how does that apply here? Hasam shiva the Shechina l'ksive, right? In the case of Miriam, like the whole idea that you should be banished for disrespecting the Shechina is not written anywhere, right? So asa kal vachomer, I say arbasar. So the first kal vachomer, so you would think the kal vachomer would say, would be a 14-day penalty for disrespecting the Shechina. Asa dayo apik shiva v'ki shiva. But because of the principle of dayo, right, we say, no, you can't stretch it to 14, you have to keep it at 7. Avol hacha. But in our case, chatzina the ksiv, we already know that there's half damages for Karen, right? This we know already. So what's the kal v'chomer doing? Must, if there is a kal v'chomer, must be telling us something we didn't know already. What could that be? The other half of the damage, in other words, full damages, and that's Rabbi Tarfon's position. Because if you limit the kal v'chomer by dayo and say no, you only pay chatzi nezek for Karen and Rishus HaYachid. So what do you need the kal v'chomer for? You already know that you pay chatzi nezek without distinction, right? We don't know if there's a distinction. So what do you need a kal v'chomer to tell you that also you pay chatzi in the same thing in Rishus HaYachid? So what's the rabbi's position? Shiva l'shchina ksiva. Yeah, we know already that you'd be banished for 7 days for disrespecting God, because tisager shivas yamim, because that's written at the end of that passage. Let her be banished for 7 days, right? So in other words, the Torah is filling us in that, yeah, it's an appropriate punishment for the Shechina, for disrespecting the Shechina. Very Tarfon, Hoti Sager Dashina Dayahu. That's actually where we get the idea of Dayo from in the first place. Rabbanan, what did the rabbi say? Ksiv Krach Mina Lati Sager Miriam. After, in the narrative of the story of the story, it says that she was indeed banished, and that is that would be the verse that tells us the principle of Dayo. Very Tarfon. So what is very Tarfon's answer? Hahuda feel Dayo. No, that tells you that Dayo is not restricted to this case of Miriam, but that it's a universally applicable. That generally speaking, we say Dayo labam minadin lios kanidon v'lo tomar hacha mishum kvodo shel Moshe, and don't say that that's only that Dayo is only here because of Moshe's because of respect for Moshe, because he requested that Miriam not be punished, or not be punished so severely, right? He had he prayed on Miriam's behalf. So maybe I would think maybe that's why Miriam only got 7 days. Really, she was liable for 14 days against the principle of Dayo, right? But maybe you would think that because of Moshe's intercession on her behalf, her penalty was reduced to 7 days. No, that's not the case. The real reason is that that we don't say that we generally say we do say Dayo. Okay, so where are we now? Everybody agrees that there is a principle of Dayo Labami Adin Lios Kandidan. You can't stretch the Kal V'chomer too far. The disagreement is there are exceptions to that where if the Kal V'chomer wouldn't thereby teach you anything that you didn't know already, then the existence of the Kal V'chomer allows you to exceed the original, the law, or the conditions of the original case. Okay, but now we're wait a minute. There's another source, another Tana that says that that you never use Dayo. So we've demonstrated, that the principle of Dayo is definitely a feature of Kal V'chomers. Just sometimes it's not applicable, but it definitely exists in general. But here's and it's a Doraisa thing, as we saw from Miriam. It's built into the Torah idea of a Kal V'chomer. But here is an example which says Rav Papa, but it doesn't hold Dayo at all. So contrary to that idea. The Tanya, and here's where we get into Tumantara. Carry Bezav Minayin. From where do you know that if remember there's just a quick review, there's a concept of a zav, a person who has like some kind of STD perhaps, or but some kind of flow from his genitals. He's called as and he's has certain rules of tuma. And you also have and that's a 7 day kind of tuma. You also have Balkari, a person who has a nocturnal emission of semen. That's a 1 day instance, 1 day duration of tuma. And now, what if a person is a zav and he has a nocturnal emission of semen? So, how do you know that semen, um, if another person touches it or carries it, that it is still something that makes that person tummy? Okay. In other words, we know about Balkari, we know about Zav, but what about the carry of the Zav? Vidinu. So we get that from a Kal V'chomer. Matahor b'tahor tame b'tame. Matahor b'tahor tame b'tame. So something which is, if a person is not tame, and something that comes out of his body, and here the Gemara obliquely is referring to spit, right? So if a tahor person spits, no problem with that. There's no reason to um, there's no reason to consider that tummy. But if a tummy person who's a zav spits, then that spit, it says specifically in the Torah, does make you tummy, does make another person tummy. So tame b'tahor enodin sheyehe tame b'tame. So something so a carry, right, a semen, which even if a person is tahor, that is a substance that makes someone else tame. So certainly, if a person is a zav, his semen would also make somebody tame, right? That's a pretty reasonable kal v'chomer derivation. Now, where the Gemara uses this principle to determine that this semen coming from a zav makes someone else tame, whether it's just being touched or whether it's being carried or moved. Okay, so what does that have to do with dayo? Ve'amai. Now, why would you be able to use that kal v'chomer? Nema ahani kal v'chomer lamaga ahani dayo la puke masa. Maybe you can say that the Kal V'chomer tells us about touching tuma, and when it comes to carrying or moving the semen, you would say dayo, right? You would say that the like you'd say, well, sure, if somebody touches the spit, then that makes them tummy. So maybe you can't extend that to carrying, to moving, because of the principle of daya. Like you can't extend it too much, more than the original. Maybe you want to say that you don't even need the kal v'chomer for touching the semen, the lagara migavra tahor, because it's no different than it's like not worse than somebody who's tahor who has a nocturnal emission if that semen is tummy. So the fact that the person who produced the semen is tame himself, like why would that make the semen less tame? So istrich, but you still need the kal v'chomer. Why? Because the Torah says I can't remember the beginning of the pasuk. 1 second. Yeah, a person who becomes tahor through a nocturnal emission, right? Something that happens at night. So Misha Shakirio Gorim Lo. So that means to tell you, the Torah means to tell you that the only semen, the time the semen is tame is if it is a nocturnal emission, if it's just semen. Like the Zav is having some kind of a flow from his body anyway, right? And so we can so maybe in that case, in the case of the Zav, we would consider it not like Balkari, right? We would consider it's only this is Zav material, um, even if it has semen in it. Maybe it's just considered Zav. Kamashwan, so the Kal Vachomer tells us that the semen of the Zav does make you tame through touching, like ordinary semen. And so the Kal Vachomer wouldn't have been canceled by applying Dio, right? So we're actually medieval davar achaksiv. What? So you want to say this because the Torah says Mikre Lila. No, it's just talking about how it generally happens. It does. It's not, and this is a little strange because, like the Gemara does this all the time, right? Is to say that to derive from words that like it's exclusive, right, or that it's limiting, right? Maybe it's not limiting here, right? It doesn't say that it has to be because it's just talking about um, the way it usually occurs. Um, so the Kal Vachomer is needed just to tell you that the semen of the zav um, makes someone else tame by carrying, and that's why this Tana doesn't apply the principle of dio, because that would nullify the kol vachomer altogether. And who is that Tana? So we've demonstrated at least a proposed demonstration that there is a Tana that does not apply dio. Um, we tried to demonstrate that there's a Tana that doesn't apply dio at all, but we ended up saying that the reason it's not applied here is because of the principle, because that would cancel the kal vachomer altogether, and that's why, just like Rabbi Tarfon, this Tana would say um, that there's no application of dio here, but you can extend the kal vachomer because otherwise there wouldn't be any purpose for the kal vachomer. And who is this Tana? Who is this Tana? Lo Rabbi Elazar, lo Rabbi Yeshua. It's neither Rabbi Elazar or Rabbi Yeshua. It's not, because we have a Mishnah. The semen of a zav makes somebody else tamei if he touches it, but not by carrying it. Obviously, carrying it without touching it. Even Rabbi Elazar. So this is Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yeshua, af matami b'masa, even by carrying it. Because in that semen, if a person is a zav and he has an emission of semen, there's got to be some zav material in there, right? So you would apply the stricter rule, which applies to zav, because there's got to be some zav in here. So that's the reason Rabbi Yeshua disagrees, right? And says with Rabbi Elazar, and says that it makes you tamei by carrying because of this reason that, well, we know there's got to be some zav in there, so the zav rule applies. But if that were not the case, if we didn't have that idea, then the semen of the zav would not make you tummy through carrying, and so uh, so now we're getting a little far afield of our original issue, but the Gemara is just trying to identify who is the Tana of this brisa that we've been discussing. Elahai Tana. Here's the source. Itnan. We have a Mishnah. Lamala mehen. Zova shel zav veroko v'shichva zaro umeme radov. 1 second. So this Mishnah is discussing kind of a hierarchy of tuma, and it categorizes together the zav flow of a zav and his spit and his semen and his urine, and if it's a woman, her menstruating blood. This whole category, you become someone who touches it or someone who carries it becomes tame. Here's a Tana, here's a Mishnah that says that the semen of a zav transmits tuma through both carrying and touching. So Gemara says maybe not. Maybe the reason of this Tana is like Rabbi Yehoshua said, that you know why it's not because it's just semen. Maybe just semen you'd only be matame through touching, right? But not through carrying. And the reason that you are tame through carrying here, according to Rabbi Yehoshua, is that we're assuming that it's not just semen, it's also zav. So our answer is in Kain, listening to Gabi Zovos. It should say so. Maishna de Ktani la Gabi Roko. Why do you say Zovo shel Zav Roko, right? V'shikva zaro memaraglav. Like you should move the instance of Shikva Zera to next to the Zav, right? Like it's the order that it's talking about. It goes the flow of the Zav and the spit and the semen, right? If the semen were related to we're only there because it's included in because it includes some material of Zav, so it should have organized the statement to indicate that the semen would be listed next to the Zav. So why does this Mishnah list semen next to spit or after spit? Because because the whole derivation is from spit, as we saw before. So therefore we can say that this Tana is not Rabbi Yehoshua, right? It's not using the same logic as Rabbi Yehoshua. It's not the logic of that the semen contains of material. Rather, it stands on its own. Okay, so back to the idea of why would you reject the dio, which appears to be a Torah derivation? Vacha said to Ravina, I'm going to find you another source that rejects dio, even so we've seen that you could reject Rabbi Tarfon and others like him can reject dio if that would cancel the need for the Kal V'chomer altogether. But I'm going to show you someone who doesn't hold the dio at all. Tanya, here's the brisa. Mapatz b'meis minayin. A mapatz is a mat. Okay, so now we're going to get into the rules of what acquires the tuma of a dead body. Okay, so the Torah discusses kalim, which we understand to be things that that are containers, right? That have a hollow in them. But what about a mat, something that's flat? Vidinhu. So how do we know that a flat mat can become tame from a dead body? Dinhu from a Kal V'chomer. Here's a detail about very small vessels. Okay, now in the case of a clay vessel, if we distinguish between the inside and the outside, if it's sealed and a person who's tamei meis, who's tamei because of a dead body, touches the outside, then the kli, the inside of it, does not become tamei, okay, because it's sealed, right? However, if it's open, even though the person doesn't touch it, he could have. So we kind of he could have stuck his hand in there. We're going to make that tamei. But what if the thing is too small for him to get his finger inside? So it's physically impossible for him to touch the inside of the kli. So then we'd say the inside of the kli remains tahor. So pachim ketanim shetahorim bezav. Sorry. So that is the case where if a zav touches it, if a zav touches one of these very small opening kalim that you can't get your finger into, then it's tahor. But matami b'meis. I'm sorry, I misstated before. In the case of a dead body tuma, then it does become tame. So mapat. So what about a mat? Shematami b'zav. We know that if a zav sits on the bed or something like that, then it does make it tame. So the same would apply to a mat, to things that are flat. There's no indication about a kli, right? That it has to have an inside, it has to have a hollow. So a mat which is of can make tame enodinchi tame mace. So a dead body, which is in the case of the small tubes or the very small opening kalim, is stricter than zav. Certainly the mat should also become made tame by a dead body. So that's our kal v'chomer. V'kamaisi ben l'tumas erev ben l'tumas shiva. And now we're applying this to 1 day tuma and 7 day tuma, right? Like you could say, no, dead body tuma is 7 days, right? So you can't derive it from tuma of the zav, which is only 1 day. V'yamai, why? Ema hani kavachomer l'tuma serev, v'hani dayo lapuke tuma shiva. Maybe you could say that, oh, you can derive it. But you can derive only a 1 day tuma. So in other words, that might be a category where the mat would become tame for only 1 day from a mace, from being sat on or exposed to to dead body tuma. So Amalek for Romani Rav Nachumi ben Zechariah Abaye. We've already dealt with this. Rav Nachumi asked Abaye, the Amalek Abaye, and Abaye answered him, Tana mimapatz b'sheretz ma'isla. You know what? We're not deriving this from the Tuma of a Zav. We're deriving it, the Kal V'chomer is from the Tuma of a sheretz, of a creepy crawly thing. This is the Kal V'chomer. Mapatz b'sheretz minayin. How do you know that a mat can become tame from a sheretz? That's the kal v'chomer we're talking about. And then we derive that. So a sheretz doesn't make you tame for 7 days; it only makes you tame for 1 day. So we can get the full kal v'chomer from sheretz, right? Just as from zav to sheretz, just as the small the small opening containers, zav makes them tame in the sheretz. Zav does not make them tame, and the sheretz does make them tame. So mapots tame v'zav, so a mat, which we know explicitly from the Torah, does become tame from being in contact with the zav, and eventually tame v'sheretz. Certainly, that tuma will apply to sheretz, and it's only a 1 day tuma, so it's the same. Okay, well, if that's the case, so how do you know that? How do you apply tuma of a mat to a dead body situation, right? Where do you get that from? Namar beged or b'sheretz. So that you get from sheretz, right? Sheretz, the Torah says v'chol beged v'chol or, right? Clothing or skin. They can become tame from a sheretz, and namar beged or b'meis, and the same words are used talking about the dead body tuma. So we make that connection. Ma beged v'or ha'amar b'sheretz mapa tame bo. Just as the tuma of a sheretz applies to clothes and to skin, and we also then find out that it applies to a mat. So the same thing too. So we now then apply that mat tuma to dead body, and mufna. Now, the Gemara is saying, and it is like this beged and or is not encumbered by being used for some other derivation, right? The ilo mufna ikal mifrach, because if not, like if beged and or were used for some other derivation, then we wouldn't be able to use it to connect sheretz and tumas mace for a mat. Because mama sheretz shekain tuma b'kadasha, because you could say that that there's a difference between sheretz and dead body tuma, because the minimum size of a sheretz that makes you tame is the size of a lentil. But a mace requires a much larger piece, an olive-sized piece of dead body to make you tame. So and why? And the Gemara says yes, indeed. Afnuye mufna, that beged and or is not used for anything else, and therefore it can actually connect sheretz and tmemeis. Michte sheretz yitkash l'shich vazera, because sheretz is linked to semen. When the Torah sums up that whole thing about all the different kinds of tuma, it lumps together sheretz and shichva zera and semen tuma. Samichle oish asher yiga b'chol sheretz. Uktiv bei b'shichva zera b'chol beged b'chol or asher yelo shichva zera. And it says about semen that uses clothes and skin. By skin, I think it means leather. So beged v'or kasher rachman b'sheretz lonely. So why does the Torah have to write beged or about sheretz? To kind of free them up, right? To give you an extra instance of sheretz of beged or so that you can connect the two. You can connect sheretz and mace. But the Gemara is not done. But still, mufna mitzad echad, it's only free on the one side, right? Like there's an extra instance of beged or when it comes to sheretz, but not when it comes to mace. So yeah, there is a view that if only one side of the hekesh of the comparative language is free, that still works to compare the two. But one who says that no, both sides of the comparative language have to be free in the sense that they're not deriving anything else. So how does that work? Our answer is the mace nami mufna. You know what? Even when regarding the dead body, it's the beged and or that's written about the dead body is an extra, is not used for another derivation. Because how do we see that? Ma itka mace itkash l'shichva zera. The dead body is linked to semen. Because it says again, in the summing up, the Torah lists them together: someone who touches a dead body or who has a nocturnal emission, etc. They're tame. So there's a link between them already. And it's written about semen that it's tame. It makes tame clothes or leather. So why? So since they're already linked, right? By that first pasuk we just quoted, what do you have to write beged and or about a dead person, about the tomb of a dead person? So that's how it's freed for us to use in the way we did. And it's free from both sides. Don mina okay be'asra. So okay, so that is okay if you're comfortable with kind of with like does the from a Xerashava, from this use of the same words, does it stay in the same category? Like how liberal do you want to be in applying the comparison? If you want to keep it in its original context, right? Then so you can say that from the Gzer Shava that the dead body can make the mapats, the mat, tame. But that tuma should be the same kind of tuma, right? It should be just a 1-day tuma, right? So it shouldn't apply to the mace because the mace grant gives 7-day tuma. Because in that case it tells us specifically the clothes have to be washed as part of the tahara process on the 7th day. Kol tumos shatem atamim b'meislo yupchusim yeshiva. That's what tells us that from the Kal V'chomer I would say only a 1-day tuma. But since the Torah also tells us that that once something is tame from a tmei mace, it always takes 7 days. That's why. So you're not deriving it kind of only from the Kal V'chomer or from the Hekesh. You're saying from the Hekesh I know that there is tuma for this mapatz for dead body, and from this other pasuk I know that also there's a new rule that anything that is tame from a dead body is not only limited to to the term of tuma that it gets from the source, in other words, from the source that we know it from, which is from zav, or from shikos, from semen. But the Torah tells us that since it's applies to a dead body, we're going to give it the full 7 days. Okay, and we'll pick up here tomorrow.
Whoa, thank you.
Okay, that was a bit of a. It's not the way you expect to encounter in Bava Kama.
Right.
Yeah. All
Yashikar.
right. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye. You too.